Good morning. I'm Joey Haber from the Flying Tortoise Academy in Portland, Oregon, and welcome to another daily Kung Fu workout. Today we're going to focus on moving the hips and working into some kicks. I hope you all enjoy it.
And changed shapes as they sparkled. They were formed from the ocean, which was also being attracted into space. Everything on the surface of the three-body world rose toward the sun. Wang looked around and saw von Neumann and Qin Shi Huang. As he drifted, von Neumann shouted at Qin Shi Huang, but there was no sound. A small set of subtitles appeared.
I figured it out. Electronic elements. We can use electronic elements to make gate circuits and combine them into computers.
Change directions.
Such computers will be many times faster and take up much less space. I estimate that a small building will be sufficient. Your Imperial Majesty, are you listening?
Qin Shi Huang swung his long sword at von Neumann. The latter kicked at a giant block of stone drifting nearby and dodged out of the way. The long sword struck the stone, causing sparks to fly, and broke itself into two pieces. Right after, the giant block of stone collided with another, with Qin Shi Huang in the middle. Stone chips and flesh and blood scattered everywhere. An appalling sight. But Wang did not hear the noise made by colliding stones. Around him, it was completely silent. Because the atmosphere was gone, there was no more sound. As the bodies drifted, their blood boiled in the vacuum, and their inner organs were vomited out until they turned into strange blobs surrounded by crystalline clouds made from the liquid they exuded. Also, due to the lack of an atmosphere, the sky turned pitch black. Everything that had floated into space from the three-body world reflected the sunlight and formed a brilliant, starry cloud in space. The cloud then turned into a giant vortex, spiraling toward its final resting place, the sun. Wang now saw the sun changing shape. He understood that he was actually seeing the other two suns, both peeking out from behind the first sun. From this perspective, the three stacked suns formed a bright eye in the universe. Against the background of the three suns in CiXinLiu, text appeared. Civilization number 184 was destroyed by the stacked gravitational attractions of a trisolar CiXinLiu. This civilization had advanced to the scientific revolution and the industrial revolution. In this civilization, Newton established non-relativistic classical mechanics. At the same time, due to the invention of calculus and the von Neumann architecture computer, the foundation was set for the quantitative mathematical analysis of the motion of three bodies. After a long time, life and civilization will begin once more and progress through the unpredictable world of three-body. We invite you to log on again. Just as Wang logged out of the game, a stranger called. The voice on the phone was that of a very charismatic man.
Hello!
First, we thank you for giving us your real number. I'm a system administrator for the three-body game. Wang was both excited and anxious.
Please, tell us your age, education, employer, and position.
You didn't fill those out when you registered.
What do they have to do with the game? When you've reached this level, you must provide these pieces of information.
Big circles?
If you refuse, three-body will be permanently closed to you.
Wang answered the administrator's questions truthfully. Very good, Professor Wang. You satisfy the conditions for continuing in three-body.
Thank you. Can I ask you a few questions?
You may not, but tomorrow night there will be a meetup for three-body players. We welcome you to attend. The administrator gave Wang an address. 18. Meetup. The location for the three-body players meetup was a small, out-of-the-way coffee shop. Wang had always imagined game meetups would be lively events full of people. This meetup consisted of only 7 players, including himself. Like Wang, the other 6 did not look like gaming enthusiasts. only 2 were relatively young. Another 3, including a woman, were middle-aged. There was also an old man who appeared to be in his 60s or 70s. Wong had originally thought that as soon as they met, they'd begin a lively discussion of three-body, but he was wrong. The profound but strange content of three-body had had a psychological impact on the participants. All the players, including Wong himself, couldn't bring it up easily. They only made simple self-introductions. The old man took out a refined pipe, filled it with tobacco,
external
and
rotation.
smoked as he strolled around, admiring the paintings on the walls. The others sat silently, waiting for the meetup organizer to show up. They had all come early. Actually, of the 6, Wong already knew 2. The old man was a famous scholar who had made his name by imbuing Eastern philosophy with the content of modern science. The strangely dressed woman was a famous writer, one of those rare novelists who wrote in an avant-garde style but still had many readers. You could start one of her books on any page. Of the 2 middle-aged men, one was a vice president at China's largest software company, plainly and casually dressed so that his status wasn't obvious at all. And the other was a high-level executive at the State Power Corporation. Of the 2 young men, one was a reporter with a major media outlet, and the other was a doctoral student in the sciences.
Switch legs.
Wong now realized that a considerable number of three-body players were probably social elites like them. The meetup organizer showed up not long after. Wong's heart began to beat faster as soon as he saw the man. It was Pan Han, prime suspect for the murder of Shen Yufei. He took out his phone when no one was looking and texted ShuiJiao. Everyone got here early. Pan greeted them in a relaxed manner, as though nothing was wrong. Appearing in the media, he usually looked disheveled, like a vagrant, but today he was dressed sharply in a suit and dress shoes. You're just like I imagined. Three-body is intended for people in your class, because the common crowd cannot appreciate its meaning and mood. To play it well requires knowledge and understanding that ordinary people do not possess. Wong sent out his text.
Spotted Pan Han at Yunhee Coffee Shop in Xicheng District.
Figure 8.
Pan continued. Everyone here is an excellent three-body player. You have the best scores and are devoted to it. I believe that three-body is already an important part of your lives. It's part of what keeps me alive, the young doctoral student said. I saw it by accident on my grandson's computer, the old philosopher said, lifting his pipe stem. The young man abandoned it after a few tries, saying it was too abstruse. But I was attracted to it. I find it strange, terrible, but also beautiful. So much information is hidden beneath a simple representation. A few players nodded at this description, including Wong himself. Wong received Dashu's reply text. We also see him. No worries. Carry on. Play the fanatic in front of them, but not so much that you can't pull it off.
Internal rotation.
The author agreed and nodded. I like the literary elements of three-body. The rises and falls of 203 civilizations evoke the qualities of epics in a new form. She mentioned 203 civilizations, but Wong had only experienced 184. This told Wong that three-body progressed independently for each player, possibly with different worlds. I'm a bit sick of the real world, the young reporter said. Three-body's already my second reality. Really? Pan asked, interested. Me too. The software company vice president said. Compared to three-body, reality is so vulgar and unexciting. It's too bad that it's only a game, said the power company executive. Very good, Pan said. Wong noticed his eyes sparkling with excitement. I have a question that...
Change legs.
I think everyone wants to know the answer to, Wong said. I know what it is, but you might as well ask. Is three-body only a game? The other players nodded. Clearly the question was also on their minds. Bond stood up and said solemnly, "The world of three-body, or TriSolaris, really does exist." "Where is it?" several players asked in unison. After looking at each of them in turn, Bond sat down and spoke. "Some questions I can answer, others I cannot. But if you are meant to be with TriSolaris, all your questions will be answered someday." "Then, does the game really portray TriSolaris accurately?" the reporter asked. "First, the ability of TriSolarans to dehydrate through its many cycles of civilization is real. In order to adapt to the unpredictable natural environment and avoid extreme environmental conditions unsuitable for life, they can completely expel the water in their bodies and turn into dry, fibrous objects." "What do TriSolarans look like?" Bond shook his head. "I don't know. I really don't. In every cycle of civilization, the appearance of TriSolarans is different. However, the game does portray something else that really existed on TriSolaris. The TriSolaran formation computer." "Huh. I thought that was the most unrealistic aspect," the software company vice president said. "I conducted a test with more than 100 employees at my company. Even if the idea worked, a computer made of people would probably operate at a speed slower than manual computation." Bond gave a mysterious smile. "You're right. But suppose that of the 30 million soldiers forming the computer, each one is capable of raising and lowering the black and white flags 100,000 times per second. And suppose also that the light cavalry soldiers on the main bus can run at several times the speed of sound, or even faster. Then the result would be very different. You asked about the appearance of the TriSolarans just now. According to some signs, the bodies of the TriSolarans who formed the computer were covered by a purely reflective surface, which probably evolved as a response to survival under extreme conditions of sunlight. The mirror-like surface could be deformed into any shape, and they communicated with each other by focusing light with their bodies. This kind of light speech could transmit information extremely rapidly, and was the foundation of the TriSolaran formation computer. Of course, this was still a very inefficient machine, but it was capable of completing calculations that were too difficult to be performed manually. The computer did, in fact, make its first appearance in TriSolaris as formations of people, before becoming mechanical, and then electronic. Bond stood up and paced behind the players. As a game, Three-Body only borrows the background of human society to simulate the development of TriSolaris. This is done to give players a familiar environment. The real TriSolaris is very different from the world of the game, but the existence of the three suns is real. They are the foundation of the TriSolaran environment. Developing this game must have cost an enormous amount of effort, the vice president said. But the goal is clearly not profit. The goal of Three-Body is very simple and pure. To gather those of us who have common ideals, Pond said.
Okay,
what
forward
ideals
roll.
do we have in common exactly? Wong immediately regretted the question. He wondered whether asking it sounded hostile. Pond studied everyone meaningfully, and then added in a soft voice, "How would you feel if TriSolaran civilization were to enter our world?" "I would be happy." The young reporter was the first to break the silence. "I've lost hope in the human race after what I've seen in recent years. Human society is incapable of self-improvement, and we need the intervention of an outside force." "I agree," the author shouted. She was very excited, as though finally finding an outlet for pent-up feelings.
The human race is hideous. I spent the first half of my life unveiling this ugliness with the scalpel of literature, but now I'm even sick of the work of dissection. I yearn for Tri-Solarian civilization to bring real beauty to this world. Bond said nothing. That glint of excitement appeared in his eyes again.
Change sides.
The old philosopher waved his pipe, which had gone out. He spoke with a serious mien. Let's discuss this question with a bit more depth. What is your impression of the Aztecs? Dark and bloody, the author said. Blood-drenched pyramids lit by insidious fires seen through dark forests. Those are my impressions. The philosopher nodded. Very good. Then try to imagine if the Spanish conquistadors did not intervene, what would have been the influence of that civilization on human history? You're calling black white and white black, the software company vice president said. The conquistadors who invaded the Americas were nothing more than murderers and robbers.
Slicing.
Even so, at least they prevented the Aztecs from developing without bound, turning the Americas into a bloody, dark, great empire. Then civilization as we know it wouldn't have appeared in the Americas, and democracy wouldn't have thrived until much later. Indeed, maybe they wouldn't have appeared at all. This is the key to the question.
Internal hip rotation.
No matter what the Tri-Solarians are like, their arrival will be good news for the terminally ill human race. But have you thought through the fact that the Aztecs were completely destroyed by the Western invaders? The power company executive asked. He looked around as though seeing these people for the first time. Your thoughts are very dangerous. You mean profound, the doctoral student said, raising a finger. He nodded vigorously at the philosopher. I had the same thought, but I didn't know how to express it. You said it so well. After a moment of silence, Pond turned to Wong. The other 6 have all given their views. What about you? I stand with them, Wong said, pointing to the reporter and the philosopher. He kept his answer simple. The less said, the better. Very good, Pond said. He turned to the software company vice president and the power company executive. The two of you are no longer welcome at this meetup, and you are no longer appropriate players for Three-Body. Your IDs will be deleted. Please, leave now. Thank you. The two stood up and looked at each other, then glanced around, confused, and left. Pod held out his hand to the remaining 5, shaking each person's hand in turn. Then he said solemnly, "We are comrades now." 19. Three-Body, Einstein, the Pendulum Monument, and the Great Rip. The 5th time Wang Miao logged on to Three-Body, it was dawn, as usual, but the world was unrecognizable. The Great Pyramid that had appeared the first 4 times had been destroyed by the tri-solar CiXinLiu. In its place was a tall, modern building, whose dark gray shape was familiar to Wang. The United Nations headquarters. In the distance were many more tall buildings, apparently dehydrotories. All had completely reflective mirror surfaces. In the dawn light, they appeared as giant crystal plants growing out of the ground. Wang heard a violin playing something by Mozart. The playing wasn't very practiced, but there was a special charm to it, as though saying, "I play for myself." The violinist was a homeless old man, sitting on the steps in front of the UN headquarters, his fluffy silver hair fluttering in the wind. Next to his feet was an old top hat containing some scattered change. Wang suddenly noticed the sun, but it rose in the opposite direction from the dawn light, and the patch of the sky around it was still completely dark. The sun was very large, its half-risen disk taking up a third of the horizon.
Wang's heart beat faster. Such a large sun could only mean another great catastrophe. But when Wang turned around, the old man continued to play as though nothing odd was happening. His silver hair shone brilliantly in the sun, as though it was on fire. The sun was silvery, just like the old man's hair. It cast a pale white light over the ground, but Wang couldn't feel any warmth from the light. He gazed at the sun, which had now completely risen. On the giant silver disk, he could pick out lines like wood grains, mountain ranges. Wang realized that the disk did not emit light. It only reflected the light from the real sun, which was on the other side of the sky, below the horizon. What had risen wasn't a sun at all, but a giant moon. The giant moon moved briskly up the sky at a pace that could be detected by the naked eye. In the process, it gradually waned from a full to a half moon, and then a crescent. The old man's soothing violin strains drifted on the cold morning breeze. The majestic sight of the universe was like the music made material. Wang was intoxicated. The giant crescent now fell into the dawn light and grew much brighter. When only two glowing tips remained above the horizon, Wang imagined them as the tips of the horns of a titanic bull rushing toward the sun. "Honored Copernicus, rest your busy feet here a while," the old man said after the giant moon had set. "Then, after you've appreciated some Mozart, perhaps I can have some lunch." "If I'm not mistaken." Wang looked at the face full of wrinkles. The wrinkles were long and their curves gentle, as though they were trying to create a kind of harmony. "You're not. I'm Einstein, a pitiful man full of faith in God, though abandoned by him." "What is that giant moon? I've never seen it the previous times I was here." "It's already cooled off." "What?" "The big moon. When I was little, it was still hot. When it rose to the middle of the sky, I could see the red glow from the central plains. But now, it's cold." "Haven't you heard about the Great Rip?" "No, what's that?" Einstein sighed and shook his head. "Let's not speak of it. Forget the past. My past, civilization's past, the universe's past. All of it too painful to recall." "How did you get to be like this?" Wang searched in his pocket and found some change. He bent over and dropped the money into the hat. "Thank you, Mr. Copernicus. Let's hope that God doesn't abandon you, though I don't have much faith in that. I feel that the model you and Newton and the others created in the East, with the help of the human formation computer, was very close to being correct. But the little bit of air left was like an uncrossable chasm for Newton and the others. I've always believed that without me, others would have discovered special relativity, eventually. But general relativity is different. The bit that Newton lacked was the effect on planetary orbit from the gravitationally induced curvature of space-time, described by general relativity. Though the error caused by it was small, its impact on the results of the computation was fatal. Adding the correction factor for perturbation from space-time curvature to the classical equations would yield the right mathematical model. The amount of computational power required far exceeds what you accomplished in the East, but is easily provided by modern computers. Have the results of the computation been confirmed by astronomical observations? If that had occurred, do you think I'd be here? But from the perspective of aesthetics, I must be right and the universe must be wrong. God abandoned me, then others abandoned me as well. I wanted nowhere. Princeton dismissed me as a professor. UNESCO wouldn't even have me as a science consultant. Before, even if they had begged on their knees, I wouldn't have wanted the position. I even thought of going to Israel to be president, but they changed their minds and said I was nothing but a fraud. Einstein began playing again, picking up right where he had stopped. After listening to him for a while, Wang strode toward the UN building. "There's no one in there," Einstein said, still playing. "All the members of the General Assembly session are behind the building, attending the pendulum initiation ceremony." Wang walked around the building and was greeted by a breathtaking sight. A colossal pendulum that seemed to stretch between the sky and the earth. In fact, Wang had seen it peeking out from behind the building, but he didn't know what he was seeing. The pendulum resembled those constructed by Fu Si to hypnotize the sun god during the Warring States period, back when Wang Miao first logged on to Three Body. But the pendulum before him had been completely modernized. The two pillars holding up the pendulum were made of metal, each as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The weight was also made of metal, streamlined with a smooth, mirror-like electroplated surface. The pendulum line, made of some ultra-strong material, was so thin as to be almost invisible, and the weight seemed to float in the air between the two towers. Below the pendulum was a crowd of people dressed in suits, probably the leaders of the various countries attending the General Assembly session. They gathered in small cliques and talked amongst themselves quietly, as though waiting for something. Copernicus, the man who crossed 5 eras," someone shouted. The others welcomed him. "You're one of those who saw the pendulums of the Warring States period with your own eyes." A friendly man shook and held Wang's hand. Someone introduced the man as the Secretary General of the UN from Africa. "Yes, I did see them," Wang said. "But why are we building another one now?" "It's a monument for Trisolaris, as well as a tombstone." The Secretary General looked up at the pendulum. From down here, it appeared as big as a submarine. "A tombstone? For who?" "For an aspiration. A striving that lasted through almost 200 civilizations. The effort to solve the three-body problem, to find the pattern in the sun's movements." "Is the effort over?" "Yes. As of now, it's completely over." Wang hesitated for a moment before taking out a stack of papers. Wei Cheng's three-body mathematical model. I came here for this. I brought a mathematical model that solves the three-body problem. I have reason to believe it will likely work." As soon as Wang said this, the crowd around him lost interest. They returned to their cliques to continue their conversations. He noticed that a few even shook their heads and laughed as they left him. The Secretary General took the document, and without even glancing at it, handed it to a slender man wearing glasses standing next to him. "Out of respect for your famed reputation, I'll have my science advisor take a look. Indeed, everyone here has shown you respect. If anyone else had said what you said, they'd be laughing at him." The science advisor flipped through the document. "Evolutionary algorithm. Copernicus, you're a genius. Anyone who can come up with such an algorithm is a genius. This requires not only superior math skills, but also imagination." "You seem to be suggesting that someone has already created such a mathematical model." "Yes. Well, there are dozens of other mathematical models. Of those, more than half are more advanced than yours. They've all been implemented and run on computers. During the past 2 centuries, such massive computation became the principal activity of this world. Everyone waited for the results, as if waiting for Judgment Day. And we have definitively proven that the three-body problem has no solution." Wang gazed up at the massive pendulum overhead. In the dawn light, it was crystal bright. Its deformed, mirror-like surface reflected everything around it like the eye of the world. In this place, in a distant age, separated from the here and now by many civilizations, he and King Wen had passed through a forest of giant pendulums on their way to the palace of King Zhou. Just like that, history had made a long circuit and returned to its starting place. The science advisor said,
It's just like we guessed long ago. The three-body system is a chaotic system. Tiny perturbations can be endlessly amplified. Its patterns of movement essentially cannot be mathematically predicted.
Wang felt his scientific knowledge and system of thought become a blur in a single moment. In their place was unprecedented confusion.
If an extremely simple arrangement like the three-body system is unpredictable chaos, how can we have any faith in discovering the laws of the complicated universe?
God is a shameless old gambler. He has abandoned us. The speaker was Einstein, waving his violin. Wang didn't know when he had shown up. The Secretary General slowly nodded.
Yes, God is a gambler. The only hope for Trisolaran civilization is to gamble as well.
By now, the giant moon was rising again from the dark side of the horizon. Its large, silvery image was reflected by the surface of the pendulum weight. The light wriggled strangely, as though the weight and the moon had developed a mysterious sympathy together.
This civilization seems to have developed to a very advanced state,
Wang said. Yes, we've mastered the energy of the atom and reached the information age. The Secretary General didn't seem to be too impressed by his own words.
Then there is hope. Even if it's impossible to know the pattern of the sun's movements, civilization can continue to develop until it reaches a stage where it can survive the chaotic eras by protecting itself against the devastating catastrophes of those eras.
People once thought as you do. That was one of the motivating forces pushing Trisolaran civilization to tenaciously come back again and again. But the moon made us realize the naivete of such an idea. The Secretary General pointed to the rising giant moon.
This is probably the first time you've seen this moon. Actually, since it's about a quarter of the size of our planet, it's no longer a moon, but a companion to our world in a double-planet system. It resulted from the Great Rip. The Great Rip? The disaster that destroyed the last civilization. Compared to the civilizations before it, they had ample warning of the disaster. Based on surviving records, the astronomers of Civilization 191 detected a frozen flying star early on.
Wang's heart clenched as he heard the last phrase. A frozen flying star was a terrible omen for Trisolaris. When a flying star, or a distant sun, seems to come to a complete stop against the background star field, then the sun's and the planet's motion vectors are aligned. This has three possible interpretations. The sun and the planet are moving in the same direction at the same speed. The sun and the planet are moving apart from each other, and the sun and the planet are moving toward each other. Before Civilization 191, this last possibility was purely theoretical, a disaster that had never occurred. But the population's fear of it and their vigilance did not diminish, so much so that frozen flying star became an extremely unlucky phrase in many Trisolaran civilizations. A single flying star remaining still was sufficient to terrify everyone.
And then, 3 flying stars froze simultaneously. The people of Civilization 191 stood on the ground, gazing up helplessly at the 3 frozen flying stars, at the 3 suns falling directly toward their world. A few days later, one of the suns moved to a distance where its outer gaseous layer became visible. In the middle of a tranquil night, the stars suddenly turned into a blazing sun. Separated by intervals of 30 hours or so, the other 2 suns also appeared in quick succession. This was not the normal kind of trisolar day. By the time the last flying star turned into a sun, the first sun had already swept past the planet at extremely close range. Right after that, the other 2 suns swept past Trisolaris at even closer ranges, well within the planet's Rocher limit, such that the tidal forces imposed on Trisolaris by the 3 suns exceeded the force of the planet's gravitational self-attraction. The first sun shook the deepest geological structure of the planet. The second sun tore open a great rift in the planet that went straight to the core, and the third sun ripped the planet into 2 pieces.
Secretary General pointed at the giant moon overhead.
That's the smaller piece. There are still ruins from Civilization 191 on it, but it's a lifeless world.
It was the most terrible disaster in the entire history of Trisolaris. After the planet was torn apart, the two irregularly shaped pieces each returned to spherical form under self-gravitation. The dense, searing planetary core material gushed to the surface, and the oceans boiled over the lava. The continents drifted over the magma like icebergs. As they collided, the ground became as soft as the ocean. Massive mountain ranges, tens of thousands of meters high, rose in an hour and disappeared just as quickly. For a while, the two ripped-apart pieces were still connected by streams of molten lava that coalesced into a space-spanning river. Then the lava cooled and turned into rings around the planets. But because of perturbations from the planets, the rings were unstable. The rocks that formed them fell back to the surface in a rain of giant stones that lasted several centuries. Can you imagine what kind of hell that was? The ecological destruction caused by this catastrophe was the most severe in all of history. All life on the companion...
Okay, that's the time we have for today. Thank you so much for watching, and check back in tomorrow. Take care.